I feel this is getting a little awkward because we talked about the discount for the Beam, and then a German was talking about Asus, and now another German is talking to you about another product. So let's see how we continue throughout the day. It's Germanized. So I'm mostly going to talk about VR, as indeed that relates to the demo we have in the other room for you. Some of you already tried it. I would really like to invite all of you to come and see that. It's much nicer if you see it in action with the headset on. I'm always remembering something that happened way back when in my youth, when one of my uncles actually was doing slide presentations, mostly at around Christmas, and it's showing pictures telling us all about what you would see if only he would have had the camera in the right position to see it. And a presentation about VR without you having headsets on is pretty much like that. So it will need a little bit of a fantasy there for you every now and then. But before I even get there, there's something really important to me in terms of gathering feedback, and I'll show you one thing that came out of direct feedback from actually a presentation like this earlier this year. So I'm indeed a senior product manager at Adobe. I'm responsible specifically for Premiere Pro Media Encoder, and one thing we always do with every release is look for the little things that just make everything a little better. And this is one of those examples. So if you have a timeline that has a lot of head and tail editing here, and therefore there are gaps, or if you would bring in stills from Photoshop and then just bring them to a specific length here, and you end up with this problem. Now, of course, I could come in and just, basically delete these gaps, do a ripple delete, but that's a lot of work. It's tedious, especially if it's a lot of stuff that you need to get rid of. So with this release, indeed, as a direct feedback from a user who asked a naive question, then it turns out wasn't all that naive and a really good one. Couldn't you just delete all of these gaps at once? And that's pretty much what I can do now just by selecting all of this. And then there's something in the menu which says close gap. And as I have selected multiple of them, all of them go away. If you have feedback like this for us, please definitely come find me after the presentation. I hope you like that. This little helper tool here, in this case, would have probably saved me on that sequence at least 1 or 2 minutes. And that's a lot if you can do that multiple times throughout the day. So I hope you like that. The other small thing, just mentioning that before I indeed go into a VR sequence, a lot of folks told us, wait a second, we're getting into more complicated projects now. We need more label colors. So with the current release, we changed from 8 to 16 label colors. And as always, as before, you can just freely change them, give them the name you'd like. So you can keep your project organized as it grows. Now, you like both? I hope you do. We're getting into the VR part. Who's done any kind of VR work so far? Small or big, doesn't matter, just something VR in production or post-production. 1, 2, 3, not too many of you. Have you had an experience with a headset, either games or a 360 presentation? There might be a couple more, yeah, half of you probably, cool. We've certainly seen that a lot of people start experimenting with it. It's certainly not mainstream. I also think most who had any prior experience with it so far say the same thing. This is not replacing anything we do for theatrical presentations or for TV whatsoever. This is something else. You can still use it for storytelling. I think there's been a lot of debate over that too. I personally think there's a lot to it. You can certainly use it for education. You can use it basically to transport yourself into a scenery and be there with the opportunity to look around. And that's pretty crazy cool. Now, this all starts, and we're going to show something very basic, but it helps me to understand some of the odd stuff that you see indeed when you don't have a headset. This is basically a sphere, in this case the globe, but VR works just like that. So when we want to bring an image into the editing application, you're not going to see the sphere. You're going to see what's called the equirectangular, which is the image to the right. So if you think of that slice in the sphere, it's represented really in an odd way, because what you see up top, that's basically what goes to the pose. So in terms of volume of image, that's very little, right? That's close to nothing. Where you think there is a moderate amount, that's actually the biggest amount in terms of volume on that slice once projected. You have to keep that in mind when you look at an image like this one. So this looks like the banana boat, but of course this boat is straight once it goes into the headset. That makes it pretty much a requirement for any application that does anything VR to have this kind of toggle available. I need to be able to use this equirectangular as a production format when it comes in. That's certainly very necessary. And by the way, there are others, but this is the most popular to date. I need to be able to switch that in the viewer without even the headset, because you can't expect people who edit VR to basically have a headset on all day. That won't work. I'll show you in the other room how nice it can be for review. That's a cool thing. But throughout the day, mostly you need to do a lot of work without having the headset on or put it on and off all the time. So this is why we have that switch. But it gets more interesting once you get there. Then, of course, other interesting issues will arise. Like, what are you going to do with something very simple like adding a blur or sharpen it or use a denoiser? If you use any regular tool, which is exactly what I'm going to show you next, if I just put a Gaussian blur onto this, with typical tool set that's made for flat images is this. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to go crazy. This is obviously not what you would do with any image any given day, but it shows the impact, which is what I'm going after. So if I turn to 180, which is pretty much where the equirectangular ends, and on the other end of the image it starts again. Once it's projected into the sphere, it doesn't matter. You'll be able to look around. It's a 360. But the equirectangular, that's a flat representation of it. And any effect that you put on top of that picture, well, it will ignore the fact that it actually needs to continue. So you end up with this really crazy seam. Now, again, this is over the top in terms of blur, but it's still there with just a little bit of, it's there, as a matter of fact, with a usable amount of blur. Now, you might say, wait a second, I've seen something in Premiere before, and I'm going to use that. And it's called repeat edge pixels. That's good. That will make it better. Again, putting the blur up high, you'll notice there's still a gap there because it's a geometry operation on a flat picture and it doesn't know what's the neighboring pixel, so it cannot do an estimation. So how to solve that problem? Well, that's fortunately with this new release in Premiere Pro, that's pretty easy because we've got a dedicated tool set that is exactly respectful of the fact that you will project onto a sphere. So I've got a couple of tools here as effects and then transitions. We'll talk about these in a minute. And I'm going to look for my VR blur. Where is it? Up top. There we go. Push that down here. I'll do the same thing. Add a lot of blur. We're at the 180 position. It's the same position in the frame. No problem here because we're projecting into the sphere first before we process the blur. So it just magically works. There is no problem. You'll also notice even in the equirectangular, once I push that back out into the regular view, same thing there, you'll see that it doesn't actually, sorry for that, it doesn't actually seem to have a fall off towards the edges, and that's exactly what you need to prevent from happening. Again, goes for all of these effects, so these are safe to use. I think what we've learned throughout the last 2 years or so when we started engaging in this realm, you've got to have tools that you can trust. You've got to have dedicated tools so you know you can't go wrong. If you just use arbitrary tools and notice a little later once you put it into the headset that instead of fixing a problem, you introduce another, then that's not very helpful. All of this goes a little bit beyond with things like, wait a second, once you're in the headset, naturally you expect the horizon to be at level. Unless you're shifting, it should be level, but with some of the rig setup, and you can see this even here, even though it's minor. Once you get to see that in the headset, you'll notice it's actually a problem. So this is just a minor tilt here, so the camera just wasn't completely straight. And that's hard to avoid, so you need to have a way to deal with that in post, and you need to have a simple way for doing that. So there is an effect in here, which is called rotate sphere, and I can use that for doing all kinds of crazy and good tricks to account for all of these things. So for one thing, there's a roll here. So if there's any problem with that picture not being level, I can fix that. You'll, by the way, notice that it's kind of crazy once you use this kind of tool in the equirectangular. You cannot rationalize these images anymore, right? By the way, this is how they would come in if you have that problem originally with your setup, right? And we all know it's more important to capture the picture. So if something is wrong for whatever reason, because you didn't have time to set it up properly or because it went wrong midstream, you need to be able to fix that. And of course, because it can go wrong midstream, you can keyframe these actions, of course, right? All of this is keyframeable. But indeed, that's a neat thing to have. Something else is pretty cool. Right now, you're actually looking towards the end of that row of buildings to the left and the church to the right. You might want to change that. You might want to give the impression that you're rolling alongside the buildings. And this is what the pan tool is for. So, and you'll also notice that this goes now fluid left to right, so it just never ends, which is kind of neat. You can freely place it wherever you need to have the person look at first at the 0 position. This is an important tool, not just because you might want them to look someplace else, but where you started. It's important for creating good transitions. One cut to the other. If you don't want to use a fancy dissolve, we got some of them, but if you can avoid a dissolve, it's actually kind of nice to actually go directly into the next scene, but you cannot go against natural motion. So if you have a movement of the camera rig, or the object, in this case, the boat the camera is placed on, you'd want both of them to basically face the same direction. This can easily be accounted for with this tool. Again, quickly switching that to the VR view, so get a better idea here. So this is basically how you say, this is where you start. We might actually have this shot work like this. So on playback, we'd actually have the boat rolled the other direction. You're looking behind to the gondolier, which for this shot might be actually a really nice experience. Now, getting into the next one, I've placed a title here. And again, showing you the difference between equirectangular and what's going to happen in the headset and why it's important to have these previews as much as a nice headset experience. This looks nice as a title, but we're projecting it. So remember, it actually needs to look a little crazy for it to look okay in the headset. So this is not good yet. In the headset, this will look like the old Cinerama logo. Remember that one? You don't even see the entire logo in this presentation. So I got to project that into the sphere. And that's exactly what the plane to sphere effect is going to give me. So I'm going to push this onto here. Now, nice, it comes into the viewing environment. That's great. But I've got, again, a couple of really great options here. For example, all of the rotation tools that I've just shown you, I can use them again. So for example, I can pan this around and now just place the title someplace else. This is extremely helpful if I want people to turn around a little towards the next edit. You can use sound to guide the audience, but you can most certainly use titles. No one's going to say, I don't want to know what the full title reads. So you're going to naturally turn a little, look at that, and then I can cut into the next edit, potentially guide people to look back. So if you want to guide people to actually do more than just look straight forward and make them explore the room, this is one of the neat little tricks that you can apply here. It's also true that sometimes that actually might be too small, so I can make that bigger. I can place two of them, one in front, one behind, so all sorts of really cool little tricks to make that work. By the way, again, dropping out of this, you'll notice this now looks a little awkward, and if I make it bigger, as soon as it looks stupid in equirectangular, it's almost guaranteed it's going to be okay in VR. It's a good rule of thumb. As I'm probably already short on time, Jim, how are we doing?
About 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes? Excellent. Cool, then I can show a couple more things. And even something non-VR that I think is cool. So we'll get into the next one here. So there's a little bit of a problem here, and I'll show that to you again in the pretend VR view, if you will. So you go from something where nothing's really close to you, and in the next shot, you go to the boat right in front of you. You go from, I don't know, a lot of feet to 4, 5 feet distance. That's a problem. If either one of you have worked on a stereoscopic 3D movie in the past, you're dealing with these issues there as well. You want to make sure that you're not going into that kind of jump unless you want to have that distraction. It's just really weird in VR specifically, as you're completely in a closed environment from here on, to have something jump in front of you. It's almost like you walk down the street and all of a sudden a person appears in front of you and you didn't see that person coming. It creates a little bit of angst. And you want to avoid that. So this is why you need good transitions. And we've got a couple of them. And no surprise, they actually might look a little weird in non-VR. Like, this is an iris wipe. Yay, welcome back to the 80s. It's beautiful in VR. And I'm going through them frame by frame. So until now, probably okay to call it an iris. As soon as I move it a little further, it's interesting that it actually goes to an iris on the outside, which is exactly, by the way, what you're going to see behind you. It will actually close the iris. And open it in front of you. And if you look to the side, it even looks like just a regular wipe. So wherever you look, the cool thing is you're going to blur the lines between these two shots quite a bit. And that helps you to guide the audience once again to make sure that they're not focusing on the one thing that might be distracting in the shot that's yet to come. If that's a little too subtle, and sometimes it is, so this is pretty interesting because it almost looks like there's a huge light source basically coming through the sphere, and then through that, other light is coming back in from the outside, projecting onto the sphere. Sorry, best description I can give. I know it sounds a little weird, but as soon as you see it, it makes sense. There's also a little bit of a geometry distortion. Some people describe that as kind of a time tunnel to that other clip. And that's exactly what it feels like to me. So I think that's a pretty neat idea. But again, that doesn't seem very useful as a transition non-VR, but it becomes extremely handy once you're doing a VR project. That's not all there is. I don't have time to show you all there is to it in After Effects. We've got a lot of tools there too for basically removing the rig. There's a lot of stuff there that will basically help you to do your VFX work that will blend into it, and of course, motion graphics. Out of time already?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Oh my, well, thanks.
Presentation.